It was through Joseph's brother Judah that God would prove himself trustworthy and fulfill his promises to Abraham to make him a blessing to every nation on earth, because it was from the tribe of Judah that Jesus would be born. But it was through Joseph himself that God fulfilled his promise to Abraham that the nation of his own descendants would be slaves for 400 years. You know the story, right? By being born to his father's favorite wife, Joseph got to be his father's favorite son. But that meant being the least favorite brother of the older 10. By telling his family about the dreams God gave him, Joseph solidified his brother's hatred, and they threw him into a cistern and then sold him into slavery, the first of Abraham's descendants to become a slave. By serving his master Potiphar well, Joseph got to be his favorite slave, but that meant also catching the attention of his master's wife. By refusing to go to bed with her, Joseph got himself accused of attempted rape, and his master was forced to throw him in jail. By telling some other prisoners about the dreams God gave them, Joseph got the attention of Pharaoh himself. He got to tell Pharaoh about his own dream and the warning it contained, and he got put in charge of responding to the warning of a 7-year famine by storing the abundance of 7 years of plenty that preceded them. Joseph got to be Pharaoh's favorite, and it was in that position that he met his brothers again when they came to buy grain from the only place that had any, from Joseph. And that's how it happened. Joseph tested his brothers and found them at least contrite over selling him into slavery, and Joseph forgave them and brought them all to live in Egypt with him. And Pharaoh gave them the land of Goshen for their flocks, and they thrived there. Too much. And Joseph died, and so did Pharaoh, and the new Pharaoh had no reason to favor Joseph because he never knew the famine because Joseph had saved him from it. So he enslaved Abraham's descendants, and God's promise was fulfilled long before Abraham's descendant would be a blessing to the nations of the world. Through Judah, they were slaves to the most powerful nation in the world because of Joseph. Here's why I think that's important. Because we know the story. We know Joseph's story, and we are so accustomed to pointing to it as a story in which a person does mostly the right thing, and God takes his situation from bad to worse to good to great, and everything works out in the end. And we say, be like Joseph. Trust God, do the right thing, things will work out, and we forget about 400 years of slavery. So, what? Don't trust God? Don't do the right thing? Don't be like Joseph? I'm not saying that. I'm just asking, do we need things to work out in order for doing the right thing to be the right thing to do? Do we need things to work out the way we think they should in order to have our trust in God validated? Or can doing the right thing and trusting God be exactly what we should do even when the result includes 400 years of slavery for our descendants? I don't think it's wrong to read Joseph's story as a lesson on God's trustworthiness. Joseph does end up better off than he started, and he did have to go through some pretty dicey situations in order to get there, and God did bless Joseph and his immediate family through that. God is trustworthy. It's not wrong to learn that from Joseph's account. But don't limit God's trustworthiness. Or I should say, don't limit yourself to seeing God's trustworthiness only when things work out. Because Joseph didn't. Things hadn't worked out yet when Joseph found himself at the bottom of a cistern, a slave in Potiphar's house, or a prisoner in Pharaoh's dungeon. And yet, at those times is when his trust in God shines, because it was at those times that he needed it the most. He needed to know that God was trustworthy, to trust in God, when trusting in God was the only thing he could do. He didn't have time to wait for things to work out. He certainly didn't need to fixate on exactly the kind of things working out that he would have wanted for himself. All he could do is trust God, and then all his descendants would be able to do in slavery was trust God, and now all we can do is trust God. We only have the one life. We don't have time to wait for exactly what we want before we'll see that God is trustworthy. And trust in God is what we need long before things even get close to working out. And after this one life, after everyone's one life, we'll see how things really did work out in the end. And because God is always trustworthy, we'll see that from the home he has always promised us. We'll finally see how trustworthy he is after all the times when we could do nothing but trust him. And we'll do nothing but praise him for having been trustworthy, for working things out the way he wanted for himself and for Joseph and for his descendants and for all nations and for all those with the same faith as Abraham and the same promises of God. We'll all praise him for Jesus, in whom we trust. You and I are dust and breath, loved by God, bought by Jesus. This podcast is produced by me, Ethan Cherney, a pastor in the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. Get in touch on Facebook at Dust and Breath Pod, on Twitter at Dust Breath Pod, or by emailing dustandbreathpod@gmail.com. Outro music arranged and performed by Mr. Peter Shawy, who is like a well-watered plant in the sunshine, spreading its shoots over the garden. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you could leave a review in iTunes or just share an episode on social media, I'd really appreciate it. It's the only way other people can find the show. Now, go do what God made you to do. Be who God called you to be. Go see what God can do with dust and breath and faith in Jesus, his Son.